Okay, so if we've got ourselves reasonably convinced that we're looking at somebody who doesn't have a huge psychological investment in this, but they're in a developmental stage, and they're in that conflict that you talked about, the conflict between the stages, Tim, as people move between the stages. Mm-hmm. If they're in that no man's land as they move, as they're dropping one idea of what faith is, dropping one idea of what knowledge is, and things are becoming very unclear for them, or if they're too stuck in a phase with a certain set of ideas, development is enhanced by questioning rather than telling. You cannot whip a person to develop spiritually, cognitively, or anything else. All you can do is invite them through questioning to look at their current position, look at their current beliefs, and begin to see the contradictions or inadequacies that are within them. And oddly enough, I've just, in the last 2 or 3 years, come across some people who have taken Hegel's dialectics and put them into reasonably formal structure, if that isn't a contradiction in terms. And the use of dialectical thinking can be very powerful in showing a person what it is they're shutting out in their models. What are they ignoring, right? Or what is their way of thinking implicitly ignore? And what happens when we bring this into what we're thinking about? Okay. Now, so we looked at spiritual materialism, and in a way, I like thinking about that, you may disagree, as sort of another facet of development. And frankly, I see all spiritual development very much related to this, that if we are in a spiritual bind, it's often because we've drawn a picture, and without intending to and without knowing about it, we've left important chunks out, and that we need to find, or we need to be helped to find a way to see these chunks, and then, through dialogue, and reading is a form of dialogue, through dialogue, finding a way of incorporating this neglected aspect of life, or these neglected aspects of life, into our picture. And that's sort of developmental, spiritual. And hopefully this is what we're all very good at. I think so. These are I think development is working with people and helping them develop, and part of coaching is great fun. It's wonderful because it's an adventure for both of you, because when you're helping somebody do that, you will learn about ways of seeing the world and ways of not seeing the world, which will teach you about the ways in which you fail to see the world, the mistakes that you make. And it's just great fun, and it's wonderful to share that with somebody. It's true of all teaching, but it's quite beautiful. So we move on to what I like to call BDB, I think we'll call that, this benignly delusional bypassing, right, in which the person is making slightly neurotic usage of spiritual ideas and practices, but they're not attached to it with any desperation. It's just it's almost developmental, but not quite, sort of on the borderline. And again, what we can do there is teach, question, and perhaps challenge as well. Again, what are you doing? How does this work? What about for example, a silly attachment, it's a fun teaching to say, well, if you felt this way about a car, what would you think of yourself? Right? And so what's the difference between a car and being able to, in my terms, meditate for 3 hours? You know, it's mild neurotic attachment. Now we're moving into an area where the person has, and we would judge this through the amount of anxiety or emotional arousal that the person has around this, but we're moving into an area where you're thinking that the person may experience some psychic pain if they had to give up this thing which they are interested in, which they're holding on to. And a symptom there is that you're going to be a bit uncomfortable talking to the person about this. You're going to feel worried about it because you will feel their tension. And this isn't spooky stuff. This is this is science. It happens all the time, and it happens in therapy all the time. And it happens in relationships. You know, when you're approaching your partner to talk about something which you know is going to cause them problems, you've developed that knowledge. And we won't talk about what knowledge is here, but you've developed that knowledge by seeing the way they react to things. So there is tension in the way they react to it. So the question here then is, well, you know, how mild is it? How deeply attached is this for the parishioner or congregant? So basically, the basic technique is to explore with this person what does that mean to you? You know, what does it mean to you? And maybe ask the question, what would it mean not to have it? But that's a judgment call, because asking that question may really upset them. Okay? It may do. And there are no rules here. You've got to judge it as you go along by looking at the level of arousal that is really in the conversation with this person.
I imagine that could be experienced as a kind of veiled threat.
Absolutely, it really has to be done skillfully and sensitively, and there are no rules. You know, it will happen. You'll have to make it up as you go, as appropriate for the person you're doing it with.
And that's back to what I was saying in terms of the carer and the development of the carer themselves. You know, because you know, what I do now is very different to what I did 5 years ago and 10 years ago and 20 years ago. So...
Yeah, and also, you know, this is where your own shadow can really contribute to the mess, right? So if you have deep unease around the same or related areas that this person is attached to, if you're not aware of your shadow, you can contribute to the mess. You can make it worse, you can miss it entirely. So
you can
collude with them, absolutely. You know, have them almost accelerate or magnify their behavior. So getting to know yourself is extremely important for skillful dealing with other people. We go back to what I said earlier, other people are the hardest thing in the world. Nothing's harder than another human being. And the only way to make it easier is to get to know this foreigner in here really well. Yeah. So if you find that if you think you're out of your depth with this friend, with this person, then you need to find a way of addressing the issue as to whether you're going to recommend that they seek professional help or not. And there we come into the things of, do you know a helpful and sympathetic list of therapists? And we'll come in more of that in the final slide.
Have you got any good suggestions? Because getting a list of sympathetic therapists isn't the easiest thing in the world. It is when you're I guess it is when you've done a therapy degree and you've met other therapists in the degree, but for folks outside the professions.
Well, there are very often directory organizations. There are two now here in Australia. And going through there, you can get a rough idea of the interests of the particular therapists. And many of them do say that they are spiritual friendly, right? And I think that's even more true in the States, and I'd be astonished if it wasn't true in Canada, right? But
Yeah, I know particularly in Canada, there's a directory of therapists that one of my friends, Clinton, was in contact with the guy who developed that. So,
yeah,
and yeah, directories like that.
I think another great resource is other more established mainline churches.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
absolutely.
Go and talk to your local Anglican pastor and say,
Yep.
Well,
who do you send people to? And
Yep. Yep.
here's my list. I mean,
Terrific.
so.
Yeah.
Yep. And there are therapeutic professional organizations. I mean, Vivian is a member of ACAP, right? Australian Kappa. I
Kappa.
always get that.
those.
Because there is an ACAP, never mind. And I'm a member
I
of
teach
the...
at ACAP and I'm a member of
I
Kappa.
know, I've been doing it for years. And I'm a member of the Australian Association of Buddhist Counselors and Psychotherapists, right? So by definition, all of us are spiritually literate.
Yeah.
Some are more Buddhist line than others, but so all of those are perhaps useful.
I guess also if you've got a therapist you've seen yourself, that might be a good person to call.
Yeah.
and
Sure.
Maybe they could recommend someone
Sure,
as well.
absolutely, yeah.
These are the people that were driving me crazy. I'm sending them your way, thanks.
Take them off my hands for God's
Okay.
sake.
I'd just like to raise a question while we're on the topic, and this is for the church hierarchy. Is I don't see how we can separate pastoral skills and spiritual guidance from some basic counselling.
That's
And I'm
what I was
wondering,
We don't.
well, what obligation then does the church have for training its clergy in
That's
basic
right.
counselling skills?
Well, this is
about the other.
I mean, we have distinctions and policies and procedures for specifically what constitutes spiritual direction and spiritual counseling versus something that might be medical or psychotherapy, and that we clearly establish very clearly, like signing forms, establish with our clergy where one ends and the other begins, and what to do if it is incredibly blurry, because probably one of the best skills you can develop as a priest is to say, I'm not the help you need.
Right.
And but I will
It's also
I will
something that
walk
we-
with you. I will
yes,
travel with you
exactly.
while you get it.
Yeah.
And kind of like one of our guys, Monsignor Jordan Stratford, described a good priest as being a Sherpa. I mean, you still have to walk the distance to the top yourself, but we can help you carry your shit.
Yeah.
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 So
exactly.
We do also train our seminarians in this. I mean, there is a course that they do
yeah,
that deals with this specifically.
Mm.
So.
and we've had in previous conclaves, and we're actually looking to make some of that available. Only the authors decide to rewrite it for legal reasons. Like I mentioned over lunch, my assistant Lance has been a nurse for 20 years, and so he did a couple-hour session on concretely recognizing the difference between psychological crisis and spiritual crisis. What to do on the fly. How do you handle that when it's beating down your door? So we try to do that, and of course, we're a small church with not a ton of resources.
That's right.
So it really for us has been about kind of cobbling together resources where we can, networking and that kind of thing. But I think the best thing we can do with what we have is to drum it into people that you cannot save everyone, you cannot help everyone, and just because you wear a collar, I mean, you're not qualified to help
Yeah.
everyone.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
but what you are qualified to do is help them to get help.
Yes, and support them.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And, what about, in traditional churches, don't a lot of the pastoral counsellors go through pastoral counselling training?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so they can wear both hats because
Yeah.
they've
But
done that
it's-
training.
Again, it's cost money. Isn't it?
Yeah,
That's
there's a
money
program,
and
or
time.
in some cases it's time. Like I work
Yeah.
at
Sure.
Calgary's largest hospital, and they have a CPE program in there, like clinical pastoral
Yeah, yeah.
education. It's just the demands on it time-wise combined
Yeah.
with the demands on it for my job
Mhm.
and
Sure.
is huge. But thankfully, I have a very supportive girlfriend who has actually volunteered, provided I can get the proper leave of absence to just say, okay, you'll be bill-free for the period of this thing.
Oh, wow.
Go and do it. So we're
That's
looking at doing that
terrific.
for next year.
That's great.
So,
Yeah. So
oh,
the more of
she's awesome,
you- yeah.
and she's awesome without ever having to show up to church.
Yeah, great.
So it's but yeah. So I mean, we try to do what we can.
Right.
Right.
Good. Okay, so this is my last slide, and we're in the serious stuff here, where you've got somebody who is, you're worried about their safety and proper functioning, and you may be worried about the safety of your other congregants, and this person may be quite disruptive to the group, right? And so really we are here in you're in a situation where you definitely will need to involve professionals. And I mean, therapists are a place to start, but neither Vivian or I see people with really severe dysfunction. We're not qualified to do that, way beyond that. So, here you go beyond your list of supportive therapists, and you need to be aware of the high-level professional, healthcare professional stuff that's going on around you. Here in New South Wales, we have 11, I think it is, areas, each of which is served by a mental health emergency team. And we can call on them at any time. Anybody can call on them at any time. And Trish will talk more about that tomorrow, I think, when she talks about suicide prevention. But I think you need to have all this stuff available to you so that when the poo hits the fan, you're not running around, amygdala's firing, not thinking properly, that you have the phone numbers there. And that's, those are the types of people you need to be able to talk to. Psychiatrists, medical psychotherapists, GPs are really good, right? Your local GPs, and very often, Tim, your local GP will have access to therapists. How spiritually literate they're going to be, or spiritually sympathetic they're going to be, is another matter, but
When you're talking
another
about
source of help.
severe dysfunction, maybe the spiritual part of it goes on the
Oh,
side.
yeah. For this
Yeah.
stuff, for
Have
this
to deal
stuff,
with,
definitely,
yeah.
forget that.
That's a good call.
Yeah.
Well, those individuals will be, trained enough to be able to sift through, because, a lot of psychological crisis comes through in spiritual terms.
Absolutely.
So, they're
Absolutely.
accustomed to dealing with it in ways that we might
Yeah.
not be.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
But I think, your thing about walking with the person is really valuable there, because the medical world probably will be not too good at addressing spiritual stuff.
Well, you can intercede a bit. And also the other thing is, chances are, if they're coming to talk to me, it might be precisely because they are intimidated by the medical community.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
For sure, someone with them can help.
Yeah.
So
I'm look-
being an advocate or something,
Yeah.
advocate.
Yeah.
Cheerleader,
Mm.
sometimes.
Mm.
This isn't exactly what you were addressing with your question, but I'm looking at that list and I'm reflecting on my own experience over the last 4 or 5 years. And I think one of the things that we probably should, as a church, proactively do with seminarians early is kind of make it an assignment that they have to assemble a referral list with these categories of professional
Yeah,
on it for their
absolutely.
local area.
That's fantastic.
Because we talk
Yeah.
about, refer, don't think you can do everything yourself, but the reality of it is if you haven't got that list of phone numbers, then you can't effectively do that. You've got to know who to go to for, who's your local GLBT
Mm.
counselling service?
Yeah.
Not everybody
Yeah.
knows.
So it's about
I don't.
prevention.
Right.
Yeah, so it's about
Yeah.
prevention, that's why I'm
Yeah.
thinking ahead, and really having a list, like I think what your assistant's doing sounds fabulous. And if that list is generated around and you actually break it down into the subcategories and get You know, is this person
Yeah.
mildly neurotic? You know, what would I need here? If not, like an ABC, what to do if you're concerned.
Mm.
I lucked
Yeah.
out. I mean, the day, it's good that Simon's here, because the day I was dealing with that case in Melbourne
Yeah.
a couple of years ago, Simon was at my house when I got
Yeah.
the first email in that sequence of emails. And so, in terms of trying to help, he said, right, we need to find the emergency response team for the guy's local area. Where's that? Okay, and we found the right people and we got something to happen. But if Simon hadn't been there with that knowledge, I wouldn't have had any idea what to do, because it's a whole other state, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Even if I'd had my local referral list,
Yeah.
that wouldn't have helped me out.
Mm.
So,
And, you know, there's also the thing that if the person is in a crisis, if you can react to it calmly and go, oh yes, let me dig out my list, and dig out the list like this is something you do every day, you're really going to help the person, you know, lower their fear. You know, they probably know they're in trouble. You know, they're feeling scared, and your ability to deal with it calmly and to deal with it as a matter of course. Let me just get my list.
My freaking out isn't going to help anything.
That's right. It's not going to help them. It's not going to help you, and it'll likely, you know.
It's
They
nothing
may
we
not
have
be
to have a
feeling
bit of
scared.
chloroform in our clerical kit bag.
That's a good idea too.
Yeah.
Ether, you know.
Tell me, does this smell like chloroform?
But they may not be feeling scared if they're, you know, bipolar.
Yes, they
In
may
the
not
manic
be.
phase,
They may,
they're
No,
like,
yeah.
they're convinced that, you know, they're onto it. You
Yeah.
know, they know that,
That's
you know,
true.
God is speaking to them directly.
but, yeah, but even there, you know, your calm
Okay.
response to it
Sorry, Will.
will be very valuable.
He's a special snowflake.
God speaks directly to me.
Yeah.
And, you know, the recommendation that you came up with there, go to your local folks who do suicide prevention courses. They are invaluable.
Mm.
Yeah.
They're really good.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, Trish is more than having done just a course. She works at Lifeline
Yeah, training.
regularly, but, you know, we've both done.
And Tim.
All three of us have done it, that's right. And it's a
Mm.
very, very good
it was
course.
a great course. One of the most valuable things out of it was the card of
Yeah.
the gazillion
The
phone
list.
numbers of.
Mm.
Yep.
So just doing that one
Mm.
suicide awareness course had a whole list of these kinds
These
of
things.
like addiction counsellors, GLBT counsellors, whatever.
But I think perhaps when we get into the you know, the pastoral assignment, like we usually make sure somebody has volunteer pastoral local work on the go to get them used to in a you know reasonably safe environment where they're interacting with people. We might just want to force it on them. Stick it in a stick them in local courses that would probably teach them quite a bit
Yeah.
without costing the whole time.
Mm.
Yeah.
And the suicide course we did was a day, and it was
$120?
Yeah.
Something like
Oh,
that. That's what I remember.
That's
I
great.
mean, it was done by the Wesley.
Wesley Life
Wesley
Force.
Wesley,
Life
yeah.
Force. And they're
So
the
the
ones that
Wesleyan
run-
Church, you know, their
They
organization.
run what's called Lifeline here, so that people, it's a 24/7 hotline, so people can ring at all times, and I'm sure you'd have stuff like that in your
Yeah.
countries and
Yeah.
states. Yeah.
Hmm.
Mm.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Oh,
thank
that's
you
it.
very much. That's
Wow,
it.
thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Yay!